Hello everybody, and welcome back for another video today. We're going to be talking about the timeline manipulation with a focus on the first millennium, 1 to 1000 AD or CE for Common Era.
But first, a quick montage.
These dates are listed 1,000 years ahead of their inscriptions in the official history books.
All at once because of a more singular event, sort of a catastrophic event as opposed to a gradual fall as it's normally laid out, and how they might have added false years into the timeline, specifically the first millennium. That's kind of going to be our focus. How could they have stretched out the timeline and hidden this from us? So that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm also going to be introducing the work of somebody I came across recently that was introduced to me, and I'm just excited to share it with you guys. So first, let me just talk about the reason why do I think the Roman Empire fell suddenly as opposed to gradually. And a lot of it comes by looking at the runes. Now, initially, a lot of this makes sense. They give various explanations as to why it's in a state of ruin and whether it's earthquakes or invading forces. So we have the Algiers in 1890, and you have various explanations. Temple of Bacchus and Baalbec. Those explanations make sense to me. But where things to start to fall apart a little bit for me is when you look at all the parts of the Roman Empire that are buried. So I think the explanation for why Rome was buried, and we've probably all seen these photos, maybe some of the video, where portions of Rome are buried in like 30, 20, 40 feet of sediment. And I believe the explanation was because of the aqueduct system was in disrepair, so that area got flooded. And
On its own?
it kind of makes sense. And even, places like in Africa, Timgad and Algeria, Northern Africa, were told it was buried in the sands for 1,000 years. So that kind of makes some sense to me. But where I guess things start to fall apart for me is when I look at the bathhouses, because whatever country they're in and whatever continent even, they seem to be buried 10 plus feet. So just this year in southern Spain, or rather in 2021, not this year, a Roman bath complex emerged from Spanish sand dunes. And they found this Roman bath complex completely buried. People would walk over this and they just didn't know it was beneath their feet. And I believe these walls are about 4 meters high. So we're talking well over 12 feet. So that's a lot of sand. It's, to cover entire structure and complex. It's it's hard to believe that's natural, you know. And we have in 2020, a year before, in downtown Amman, Jordan, they were experiencing flooding, so they were going to try and rectify that problem by improving their infrastructure. And during excavations, they stumbled upon a Roman bath that nobody knew was there. And again, it's like 10, 15, 20 feet deep. And I think the explanation was there was an ancient river that caused this portion of the city to be buried. So it's just harder and harder for me to believe that all of these various sites in different countries are constantly being buried. Here's just another photo image of that one site in Amman, Jordan. Look at these guys down here, just way down. But, you know, the UK, United Kingdom, is a treasure trove of buried Roman architecture. In Silchester and England, again, they found another settlement with a bathing complex, bathhouse, and again, just like 10 plus feet deep. And it's just so we're totally different countries, you know, North, South Europe, Middle East, it doesn't matter. And I talked about this one's Roman baths in Bath, England, I think before. And I think this one was in the 1870s or thereabouts that they discovered this Roman bath that was buried. And I think the River Avon was the culprit. And again, a lot of times they'll say it's a river. But this was an interesting one. Again, in England, Exeter Cathedral in Exeter, England, they were digging for a car park about 10 feet deep. They ran to another Roman bath and they didn't know it was there. And in this case, I believe they say they intentionally built, or the cathedral builders intentionally built on top of the bathhouse. So over here, it's intentional. Here, it's a river. I'm not even sure what the reason is here. Over here's a river. You know, it keeps changing, but the theme is a constant theme, and it's buried 10 plus feet deep all the time. And you start looking at the buried Roman villas again in the UK. Just some of the uh, explanations. This was one of the more far fetched ones. When the Romans left Britain, it appears that some villas were covered with dirt to trap into them the spirits of the Romans. I mean, you know, what are you going to do with that? It's like just on top of all of this, it's just not believable to me. So I thought the most logical place to look for sort of false narratives and added years might be to look at the Anglo-Saxon period, because when you look Exeter Cathedral, you have this culture, the Roman culture, right, and the Roman settlement, and then from my perspective, there was a disaster event that buried it, and then you have the cathedral building culture, right? So you have these two separate cultures that are pretty defined, but in England, we're told in between those two cultures, you had the Anglo-Saxons. So if there was going to be false narratives, false years, stage centuries, I figured that would be a good place to look. And my focus was just looking at architecture. So we're told a lot of the Anglo-Saxon architecture was made from, you know, of wood. So it hasn't lasted or survived, which makes sense. But we are told that there are some remnants of Anglo-Saxon churches that we can look at. So when you start looking at these churches, some interesting narratives pop up. And this particular church, St. Lawrence's Church, Bradford on Avon, it's apparently or allegedly one of the very few surviving Anglo-Saxon churches that does not show later medieval alterations or rebuilding. So just kind of doing a little bit of background on the structure. Immediately, according to the Wikipedia, it says the date of the building has been much debated. And then I came across a YouTube video. Somebody else uh, Charles Koss had an interesting video titled "Oops, It's UK's Oldest Saxon Church, Actually Late Roman." And I think he was pointing to arched windows, but I thought that was interesting. And so looking into this church a bit more, I came across this uh, Carolingian Renaissance, the specific type of architecture that belonged to this Carolingian Renaissance. So the interesting thing about this Carolingian architecture is it was the style of the Northern Europe, and primarily in the 8th and ninth centuries. And the thing about it is that it was a conscious attempt to emulate Roman architecture. Basic premise going into this was that there was an event that destroyed the Roman civilization, and some of their structure probably survived. So here we have this.
We're given this type of renaissance that is supposedly trying to recreate this earlier Roman architecture.
So what I am thinking is that this structure was pre-existing. It survived whatever event happened, but they're just classifying it as Anglo-Saxon. That's my view. So, sure enough, when you look under Carolingian architecture, this particular church shows up as an example of that. And it's dated to this time frame, but I'm thinking it belongs to this previous, to the Roman civilization and culture, as opposed to the 8th and ninth centuries. Now, speaking of Carolingian architecture, there is one more example I want to go over because I think it's going to tie into the point that I was trying to make with the church that we just talked about. And this structure is called Ingelheim, and it was an imperial palace of this Carolingian dynasty. Charlemagne is said to have stayed there, as well as some of the other rulers, but it's an example of this Carolingian architecture, which is very much looks like an older Roman palace and villa from 500, 600, 700 years ago. But we're told this structure was built in the second half of the 8th century. Now, the intrigue sort of creeps into the picture because in the late 1800s, they found a water tunnel that was part of this complex, and this water tunnel was made waterproof by this hydraulic Roman mortar, this Roman cement. And why does that have any significance?
So the problem with that is it's supposed to be lost to the world after the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. So just a bit of a problem there. It's showing up 300 years after that at this Ingelheim site in the water tunnel. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
300 years later, roughly, it makes an appearance in this imperial palace, which we're told was intentionally designed to look like an older Roman styled imperial palace. So I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that I'm of the belief that the structure is actually older than they're saying. It was actually built in the earlier part of the first millennium, and that pushed it forward, through this means of calling it Carolingian architecture. That's my speculation anyways, but I thought it was a really interesting example. So I just wanted to mention that. There's a second means now, a method, I guess you could say, that I think they're using to sort of push or claim certain structures as being older than they are, and that's called spolia. And it's just the idea of repurposing building material from one structure and using it in another structure. So what you will come across when you start looking into these older, what we're told, typically churches from this Anglo-Saxon period, a lot of them will say they took this structure was built using the brick and stone from like some other Roman structure, but really it's from this time period.
And I guess what I'm speculating is that actually, in actuality, these structures were initially built with Roman,
brick and stone, and
maybe modified later, but they're actually from that time period. And this is one example, this chapel of St. Peter on the wall. And we're told it was likely built around this period of time. But again, they say it incorporates Roman bricks and stones. But, I can see a lot of arches here. And again, I can't prove this, but I suspect that it actually started out as it was built during the Roman occupation. And I think and there were probably other Roman structures around it that were in ruins, so it gives them a likely story to use. But again, this is speculative. And here's another example: All Saints Church in Brixworth. Now, we're told this is a leading example of early Anglo-Saxon architecture. And when you look into this structure, this is kind of the front of the church. And we're going to go to the back here. But according to Wikipedia, this structure as well was built using reclaimed Roman stone and brick. Now, when you go to the back of the structure, the ground level changes significantly on the sides and on the back of the structure. And you can see a gentleman way down here. So it's quite a change in the grade. And I think I got another photo here. This particular section, I just kind of got it zoomed photo of that. It's interesting just to see. I think this structure was actually built during the Roman occupation. This event happened, and this church got covered in layers of earth during that event. And maybe they've modified it after the fact with other, construction. But I think the base of it was Roman brick and stone, and they've just added to it. And I think the mud flood effect around it speaks to actually belonging to the previous Roman occupation. But again, that's my view.
now let's get into talking about this phantom 700 years in the first millennium. Okay, now I'd like to introduce the research of this individual, Gunnar Heinzen, and he talks about catastrophe and chronology, which are two subjects I really enjoy researching myself, but his focus is in the first millennium AD. Now, I came across this link to a video of his on stolenhistory.net. Thanks to whoever posted that. I appreciate that. But he has a video that I'll link to, and maybe it's slightly over an hour long. And he has so much material that it'll be impossible for me to encapsulate all of it. But the basic premise of his work is in research, especially into the chronology of the first millennium. His basic premise is that the first 200 to 300 years of the first millennium AD, there's reality to those, but the next, roughly speaking, 700 years or so are phantom years. They didn't actually happen. And there's various techniques that our controllers have sort of employed to stretch the timeline, and we're going to talk about some of those. But what I want to do is just give you a brief snapshot into some examples he gives and talks about. And if you're interested, I'll leave a bunch of links and you can investigate further. But let's start in Rome. Now, again, his concept is that the first, roughly speaking, I think he even pretty exact with it, but I think he usually says like the first 230 years there's reality to those. Next 700 are fictitious. So doing his own research, what he had come to realize, researching this 700-year time period after the year 230 AD, no apartments were built in Rome for 700 years. No latrines were built in Rome for 700 years. No aqueducts were built in Rome for 700 years. And he continues to go on, but like just those three alone, that doesn't make a lot of sense. In addition to, we mentioned the residential quarters, latrines, aqueducts. In addition to that, no sewers, roads, ports. He threw in bakeries. Basically, nothing is being built with Rome itself during this period of time, roughly speaking, 700 years. And he just cites different excuses given, like why didn't the emperors build? Why would the senatorial class build? Why didn't the aristocracy build? Like the elite, how come they're not building? Like no one's building anything. But the one thing being built during Rome in this 700-year period are churches. Again, what we're told, these churches that are built in like the 4th and 5th centuries, we're told that they're designed to look like these 300-year-old, they're basilicas of the antiquity, the first 300 years. So they're dated 4th, 5th, 6th century, but they look at just like the basilicas of the first 3 centuries. And then if you go, so just like once again, these churches and basilicas, we are told that were built in the 4th, 5th, and 6th century AD look identical to the ones built in the first 3 centuries of the Roman occupation. It's something to note. This is just a means of extending the timeline, and his view, and I tend to agree, is that these churches were all built at the same time during the first 230 years or so of the first millennium. Now, and again, just one example here, this church, Santa Maria, built, I believe, in the 5th century. Yeah. And it's a beautiful church. And when you go on the Wikipedia and start reading on it, one scholar, it so closely resembles a 2nd century imperial basilica that it sometimes has been thought to have been adapted from a basilica for use as a Christian church. So he's just noting, yeah, it looks just like a 2nd century imperial basilica. And his premise here is that why it looks like that is that it actually was constructed during this first 3 centuries, the same time frame. The controllers, they're using the dating system to add phantom years to the timeline. Now, other Roman capitals are being established in the 4th and 5th centuries, we're told. And it just so happens that they are laid out and they resemble Rome in the 1st and 2nd centuries, which is interesting. And he just makes a point that like within these other Roman capitals that we're told are being rising up, being constructed in the 4th and 5th centuries, all these buildings are also being constructed. So why is all this construction like just like Rome 300 years ago, but how come nobody's building anything in Rome during this period of time? Interesting point. And he's just saying that all these cities look similar because they actually exist side by side at the same time. So another point he makes, which is valid points. Now, there are so many, at least links to his website, but there's so many like PDF documents that you can open up, and he touches on all these different locations. And I'm just going to hit on maybe 2 of them, just so you can kind of get a basic pattern. And he talks about this place called Pliska, and it's in present-day Bulgaria, I believe. And it was according to the narrative, it was a first Bulgarian capital between 681 and 93 AD. So in 7th century, we're told this city was established. And according to the research he's done, it has a similar layout to a Roman city and settlement. And
looking at the site, there's a second century Roman bricks associated with it. So you have this 7th century city that has a layout of a older Roman city and also has building materials associated with it from the first older Roman construction. But it also has this Roman style. They had a Roman style hypocaust heating system, and apparently these tunnels resemble in shape and execution Roman tunnels. But the kicker is they found these walls of these tunnels they found a reservoir. Yes, they found a reservoir, and its walls were plastered with special hydrophobic mortar and Roman cement. And once again, so again, this Roman cement, this city was established in 681. And the recipe for Roman cement, Roman concrete, was lost in 476 or something like that. So we're talking 200 years later in Bulgaria. They got this building material from the 2nd century Rome, and they've got this Roman cement.
And remember, just again, they tell us that this special cement and Roman cement is lost to history. It's gone forever. And piled together, we have a lot of different indicators now that this city was actually built and coexisted this Pliska with the Roman Empire, and it wasn't a separate time frame. So, yeah, I found that to be a very interesting point. Next, lastly, I want to move to this place right next to Pliska. It's a place called Varna. And I find this site very interesting. And you can see here how close it actually is on the map. And this will be our last kind of topic to explore.
Far from Varna, there's this stone desert. And I believe there's only 2 deserts in Europe, and this is one of them. And it's by this place called Varna, but you can see Pliska is very close. What happens with Pliska, it comes to a terrible and dark gray layer, strangled the urban jewel for good. So the mud basically shows up, and they say between the 11th and 15th century, Pliska Basin was turned into a desert landscape. So I guess the idea here is the site got whatever this catastrophe was, it hit Pliska, this Bulgarian city, we're told. It hit it at the same time as whatever hit Rome did. Interesting stuff, you know. Now, just one more example. Let's go to Northern Europe and look at the Vikings, because the Viking Age, you know, roughly close to almost 300 years, not quite, but 250 or so. And they placed the Viking Age at the later portion of the first millennium Now, in his research, you know, he's just looking at it and asking some pointed questions like, why did the Scandinavian raiders waste the first 700 years of the first millennium before they could finally bring themselves to build ports and use sails? It is an interesting question because he just points out, you know, we know that there was Roman settlements all throughout England, the UK. So how could they reach England, but not the neighboring Scandinavia? So he's just comparing the 2nd century Roman square sailing trading vessels compared to what we're told are 10th century Viking square sail trading vessels. And I think the point he's getting at here is that the Vikings actually existed concurrently with the Roman Empire, Roman civilization of first 3 centuries, instead of being from, you know, this period of time, roughly from this 250, 300 years at the end of the century, millennium. They actually, they coexisted is the point he's trying to make. And he's just comparing this second century Roman, the square sail war gallery, and comparing it to what we're told is an 8th and 9th century Viking square sail war gallery. And he's saying they're similar because these people coexisted. They're running concurrently at the same time. And he also notes that you find a lot of 2nd century Roman coins, in a lot of these Viking settlements, and you find a lot of these low value coins. They don't have a lot of value, so the idea that they're hoarding them doesn't make a lot of sense. So I guess what he's insinuating here is the reason that we have a lot of these 2nd century coins and low value coins is because they were trading with them. They were using them as they were from that time period, right? As opposed to like these coins being passed down for like 700 years or something. And yeah, they find a lot of artifacts from the first 3 centuries in these Viking sites. They also find this Roman Millefiore glass. This 1st century Roman glass, they find it what we're told are these 8th century Viking sites. They're running at the same time. That's why they have all these artifacts and coins. A lot of these Viking settlements, just like Pliska, that get buried under soil layers of earth, and they get abandoned. And this is just one trousseau in Poland, and there's another one in Norway. But so we're given all the different times for these places, existing, and then there's some disaster that befalls them and they get abandoned. What he's saying is that the catastrophe that affected Rome also affected Pliska in Bulgaria, and it also affected these Viking sites. And these Viking sites and Pliska, Rome, they are all concurrent with each other, and they're not like 700 years apart. So they've inserted phantom mirrors, stage centuries, and he's got a lot to say about a lot of other things. And he talks about the Anglo-Saxons and Constantinople, the Middle East. He just goes into a lot of different things. So I'll leave it some links. And again, this is what I've just shared is a fraction. I didn't even cover like some of the more impressive points, but I'm just trying to give you a basic feel for what is being proposed. So I think I'll leave it here for today. God bless, take care, and love you all. Bye-bye.
How were the people at that time blinded and forced to accept this time shifting? How the society could have been manipulated to simply accept 1000 staged years? Because we have to keep in mind that in those times there was a lot of brilliant minds walking on this earth. In fact, also the physicist, mathematician and philosopher Sir Isaac Newton understood this chronological distortion, and he wrote chronicles about it. On the screen, we can appreciate one of his works, done to unmask this falsified historical timeline. It's called The Chronology of Ancient Kingdom Amended, and he theorized that the Greek Empire was artificially sent back in time 534 years, the Romans 1000 years, and the ancient Egyptian with 1800 years. Gregorian calendar. People were forced to accept the new chronology. It is almost diabolical. They have tricked us, fooled us. These parasitic psycho-illusionists, they have distorted the perception of our own history, making us think that it is thousands of years that there's wars and conflict, giving us the sensation of impotence, looking at the sick current events that we are living in these days, making us think that it has always been like this. that the human species is thousands of years experiencing these social problems.